I came home and found my mother-in-law counting cash. "I sold that junky car. You needed something more practical anyway," she said. I just smiled and thanked her for taking care of it. She had no clue the junk car was a fully restored 1967 Shelby Cobra worth $300,000, or that I'd already called the police. I never imagined that walking into my mother-in-law's kitchen would mean staring down the barrel of a betrayal so deep it would not only obliterate my father's legacy, but also shatter the entire foundation of my marriage. It was a moment of shocking, calculated injustice that changed absolutely everything. My name is Amanda, I'm 34, and cars have literally been my life ever since my dad first put a wrench in my hand when I was just 7 years old. For us, cars weren't just transportation, they were living history, stories whispered through chrome and steel. My father, Robert, had this almost magical ability to listen to an engine and diagnose its problems like a doctor with a stethoscope. Every single weekend of my childhood was spent in our suburban Detroit garage. He taught me the difference between a carburetor and a fuel injector before I could even spell either word. "Mandy," he'd say, his hands blackened with engine grease, "knowing how to fix what's broken is the most valuable skill in life." Those words, I'd learned decades later, applied to so much more than just automobiles. Dad's ultimate dream, his white whale, was to own a Shelby Cobra. He kept this dog-eared poster of the iconic blue, with white stripes 1967 model above his workbench, a silent promise to himself. Someday, he'd whisper, "when the time is right." But the time never came. Pancreatic cancer took him quickly when I was 22, fresh out of college, with an automotive engineering degree. I inherited his tools, his knowledge, and his unfinished dream. At his memorial service, I made a silent vow. I would one day own and restore the Cobra he never had. It would be my tribute, my way of keeping his hands working alongside mine, even after he was gone. I met Jack at a classic car show in Ann Arbor, where I was showcasing a 1972 Mustang I'd restored. He stood out from the usual crowd, asking intelligent questions about the restoration process, not just admiring the shine. When he invited me for coffee, I surprisingly said yes, even though I was usually wary of men who approached me at shows. Jack worked in marketing, but he had a genuine appreciation for automotive history. He listened intently as I talked about compression ratios and original factory specifications, never once making me feel like I needed to dim my expertise or enthusiasm. By our third date, I was already imagining a future garage we might share. "You're different from other women I've dated," he told me 6 months in. "You're passionate and knowledgeable about something that matters to you." I love that. Looking back, meeting his mother, Patricia, should have been my first blaring warning sign. Jack had mentioned she was traditional, but I hadn't understood the full, suffocating meaning until I sat across from her at Sunday dinner, trying to navigate her rapid-fire questions about my cooking abilities and when we planned to have children. "Cars are such a dirty hobby for a young lady," she'd remarked, wrinkling her nose, when Jack proudly mentioned my restoration business. "Surely, that's just a phase until you settle down properly." I caught Jack's slight wince, but I also noted how quickly he changed the subject rather than defending me. At the time, I dismissed it as him avoiding conflict during a first meeting. I didn't recognize it as the debilitating pattern it would become. Despite that rocky start, Jack and I married 14 months later. Patricia gifted us crystal serving dishes along with a handwritten note suggesting I might want to focus on making a beautiful home now. The serving dishes remained in their boxes, tucked away in our storage closet untouched. For the first 3 years, life was good. My small restoration business grew steadily, and Jack's marketing career advanced. We bought a modest house with a 2-car garage that I immediately upgraded with professional-grade equipment. Patricia visited monthly, making small comments about the unusual setup of our home, but I learned to let them roll off my back. Then, everything changed. Jack lost his job during company-wide layoffs. His severance package was minimal, and my business was experiencing a seasonal slowdown. After 3 months of dwindling savings and mounting bills, Jack suggested we temporarily move in with Patricia. She had a spacious 4-bedroom house since her husband's passing 5 years earlier. It'll just be for a few months, he promised, until I find something solid and we can rebuild our savings. I agreed reluctantly, knowing it was financially sensible, but my stomach coiled with dread at the thought of her constant scrutiny. What made the decision bearable was what happened just 2 days before we were set to move. Mr. Caldwell, an elderly neighbor, mentioned he was clearing out his late brother's barn. Got some old car parts and maybe a chassis he was tinkering with. Probably junk, but you're welcome to look before I call the scrapyard. That junk turned out to be the neglected remains of a 1967 Shelby Cobra. The body was damaged, the engine seized, and years of dust and rodent nests had taken their toll, but the chassis number, it confirmed its authenticity. My heart nearly stopped when I verified it. How much? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Caldwell shrugged. If you can haul it away and it saves me the scrap fees, it's yours. Brother always said he was going to fix it up. Never did. I arranged for transport to Patricia's house the very next day. I explained to Jack, my voice vibrating with excitement, this isn't just any project car. This is the project car. My ultimate tribute to Dad. Patricia's disapproval was immediate and unrelenting. You're bringing that tetanus hazard to my property? She asked, her nose wrinkled in disgust as the flatbed delivered the Cobra to her oversized garage. It's incredibly rare, I explained. Once restored, these sell for hundreds of thousands. She scoffed. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you too. For the next 18 months, every spare moment and dollar went into the Cobra's restoration. I documented each step meticulously, authenticating original parts and sourcing period-correct replacements when necessary. The process was therapeutic. With each component I restored, I felt closer to Dad, his hands guiding mine. Jack showed interest initially, but he grew distant as the project progressed, echoing his mother's concerns about money disappearing into that heap. Patricia's comments became a daily occurrence. Wouldn't your time be better spent looking for real work? Or, that garage smells like a gas station because of that thing. No wonder you two can't afford your own place yet. I stopped trying to explain the car's value to her. Some people would never understand the difference between expense and investment, between junk and treasure in progress. I simply nodded and continued my work, watching my father's dreams slowly materialize under my hands. 3 weeks before the incident, I completed the restoration. The Cobra gleamed in its original Guardsman blue with Wimbledon white stripes. The 427 cubic inch V8 engine purred with perfect pitch. The leather interior was immaculate and every gauge, switch, and emblem was period correct. I took it for its first real drive at dawn, before Patricia would be awake to comment. As the sun rose over the Michigan farmland, I felt Dad riding shotgun, his approving smile reflected in the rearview mirror. I allowed myself exactly 1 tear before focusing on the road ahead. The Cobra wasn't just a car, it was 18 months of meticulous work. It was my father's unrealized dream. It was proof that some things, with enough care and dedication, can be brought back from the brink of destruction. And soon, it would become the focus of a betrayal I never saw coming. Living under Patricia's roof was an exercise in extreme restraint. Every morning began with her commentary on my choice of breakfast, my work clothes, or my schedule for the day. No detail was too small for her critique. Women in my day wore a touch of lipstick, even for casual days, she remarked one morning as I prepared to meet a client. I'll be under a car most of the day, Patricia. Lipstick isn't practical, I replied, keeping my tone light while mentally counting the days until Jack would find stable employment. When I returned that evening, I discovered she had reorganized my closet according to her color-coding system, discarding several of my unflattering work shirts in the process. Jack's response when I expressed my frustration was predictable. Mom's just trying to help, Amanda. She doesn't mean any harm. This became his mantra, repeated so often it lost all meaning. When Patricia threw away my specialized carburetor adjustment tools, assuming they were junk cluttering her garage, Jack bought me new ones rather than addressing the boundary violation. When she criticized my cooking as too spicy and not how Jack was raised, he suggested I try adapting my recipes rather than asking her to respect my culinary choices. The Cobra became my sanctuary. Each evening, I would escape to the garage, running my hand along its perfect curves, adjusting already perfect components, and finding peace in its presence. The car represented everything Patricia couldn't touch or control: my skill, my connection to my father, my independence. 2 months into our stay, I entered a local car show, partly to showcase the Cobra and partly to enjoy a day away from Patricia's constant supervision. The car drew crowds throughout the day, with enthusiasts marveling at the restoration quality and the vehicle's rarity. "You don't see Cobras this authentic often," remarked one judge, inspecting the engine bay. "Most are replicas or heavily modified. This is museum quality." The Cobra won Best in Show and Most Authentic Restoration, validating the countless hours I'd invested. More significantly, a private collector approached me with a cashier's check for $280,000. "I'll add another $20,000 if you can deliver by next weekend," he said, his eyes never leaving the car's gleaming finish. I declined politely, but kept his card. The offer confirmed what I already knew: the Cobra wasn't just sentimentally valuable, it was a significant financial asset. When I shared the news with Jack that evening, his eyes widened momentarily before glazing over with his mother's influence. "Maybe we should consider it," he suggested. "That would solve our housing situation immediately." "This isn't about money," I explained, for what felt like the 100th time. "This is about my dad, about craftsmanship, about preservation." Patricia, overhearing from the kitchen doorway, didn't bother hiding her eye roll. "Playing with toys instead of focusing on real responsibilities," she muttered, just loudly enough for me to hear. Later that week, I overheard her in conversation with Jack in the living room. "You need to control your wife's spending habits, Jackson. All that money poured into that car when you could have put a down payment on a house by now. That's not a partnership. That's selfish." Jack's response was inaudible, but his silence over dinner told me he hadn't defended me. The tension in the house grew thicker, pushing me to spend longer hours at the garage, where I contracted occasional restoration work, leaving the Cobra alone in Patricia's garage more frequently than I liked. My unease grew when I returned one evening to find a fresh scratch along the Cobra's passenger door. Patricia explained it as an accident while parking her SUV. "These things happen in shared spaces," she said with a dismissive wave. "It's just a car." That night, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, I installed a security camera in the garage, concealing it among Dad's old tools on a high shelf. I didn't tell Jack or Patricia. Something in my gut told me to keep this precaution to myself. The evening before the incident, tensions reached a breaking point during dinner when Patricia brought up the garage space again. "That car is taking up room where Jack could be parking," she complained. "Winter's coming, and he shouldn't have to scrape ice while that collectible sits protected. I pay additional rent specifically for that garage space," I reminded her, setting down my fork to maintain composure. "We agreed to those terms when we moved in." "Well, agreements can be reconsidered when they're not working for everyone," she replied sweetly, turning to Jack. "Don't you think, honey?" Before Jack could respond with his usual peacekeeping platitudes, I stood up. "Let me be explicitly clear," I said, looking directly at Patricia, my voice unwavering. "No one touches my car. No one moves my car. No one makes decisions about my car except me. Is that understood?" The silence that followed was brittle. Patricia's smile never reached her eyes. "Of course, dear. No need to be dramatic." Later that night, Jack promised to talk with his mother about respecting boundaries. "She'll come around," he assured me. "She just needs time to adjust to sharing her space." I nodded, not believing him, but too exhausted to argue. As I drifted off to sleep, a sense of foreboding settled over me, as if something irreversible was about to occur. I dismissed it as stress-induced paranoia. The next morning, I kissed Jack goodbye and headed to work, utterly unaware that I was driving away from everything I had built, leaving it vulnerable to the one person who saw no value in it at all. The morning at the garage began like any other. I finished an oil change on a classic Thunderbird, then moved on to diagnosing an electrical issue in a vintage Corvette. Around 11 a.m., my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number, about those additional Cobra parts you mentioned. "When can I pick them up?" I stared at the message, confusion slowly giving way to a sickening dread. I hadn't mentioned additional parts to anyone. I hadn't been selling any Cobra components. My fingers trembled slightly as I texted back, "I think you have the wrong number. I'm not selling any Cobra parts." The response came quickly. "Just left your place with the car. Older lady said you might have extra components in storage. Said to text this number." The garage seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the workbench, breathing suddenly difficult. Asterisk, an older lady. "Patricia, my Cobra." Asterisk, I called Jack immediately. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Emergency came up. "Need to leave early," I told my boss, already grabbing my keys and jacket. He nodded, used to the unpredictable nature of restoration work and client emergencies. The 20-minute drive home stretched into an eternity. My mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. Asterisk, maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Patricia had just moved the car. Maybe Jack had decided to take it for a drive and Patricia had covered for him. Asterisk, I knew these were lies even as I thought them. The text was clear. Someone had my car. Patricia had sold my car, turning onto Patricia's street. My last hopes evaporated at the sight of an unfamiliar pickup truck in the driveway, its bed loaded with what appeared to be car parts. My car parts. I parked haphazardly and rushed inside, finding Patricia at the kitchen table, methodically counting stacks of crisp $100 bills with the satisfied expression of someone who had just completed a successful mission. "Oh, Amanda, you're home early," she said, looking up with a smile that didn't falter even as she registered my expression. "Where's my car?" The words came out surprisingly calm, belying the hurricane inside me. "I took care of that junky car situation," she replied, patting the money. $15,000. More than fair for something that wasn't even running properly. The room seemed to darken around the edges. Not running properly? The Cobra that had one best in show? The engine I had rebuilt by hand? The car was running perfectly, I managed to say. "Who told you it wasn't?" Patricia waved dismissively. "I could hear those weird noises it made. Very unsafe. Besides, you needed something more practical, and now you have the money to buy it." She beamed, clearly expecting gratitude. "I started at $10,000, but I'm an excellent negotiator. $15,000. For a car worth $300,000. For my father's dream. For 18 months of my life." "Patricia," I said, carefully controlling each word. "That car was worth $300,000. It was a fully restored 1967 Shelby Cobra, one of the most valuable classic cars in existence." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Don't be ridiculous, Amanda. No old car is worth that much, especially not one sitting in my garage." The buyer was very happy with the price. I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. "I need the buyer's contact information. Now." Something in my tone must have registered because she pushed a scrap of paper with a name and number across the table. The same number that had texted me. "His name is Roger something. He seemed very knowledgeable about cars. Said it was exactly what he was looking for." I'm sure he did, I thought bitterly. A $300,000 car for $15,000 would make anyone knowledgeable about cars ecstatic. "Did you give him the documentation that was in the trunk?" I asked, a new wave of panic rising. "The authentication papers? The restoration journal?" Patricia frowned. "There was an old binder and some papers." I told him that was included, of course. The authentication papers, the documented provenance that proved the car's value, the journal chronicling every restoration step, and my father's vintage Rolex watch that I'd placed in a hidden compartment I'd built into the trunk as a personal tribute, along with several original factory parts I'd preserved in their own custom cases. All gone. "I need a moment," I said, turning toward the bathroom. "You're welcome," Patricia called after me. It was taking up so much space in the garage. Now we can put it to better use. In the bathroom, I locked the door and slid to the floor. A strangled sob escaped despite my efforts. The panic rose like floodwater, constricting my chest, darkening my vision. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think beyond the magnitude of what had just happened. Dad's dream, my tribute, my investment, my future security, all sold for a fraction of its worth by a woman who had no right to touch it. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the panic receded enough for me to splash cold water on my face. Looking in the mirror, I saw my father's determination reflected back at me. He hadn't raised me to collapse when things got difficult. He taught me to assess, adapt, and act. "Fix what's broken," I whispered to my reflection. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed Roger's number. Roger answered on the fourth ring, his voice cautious when I identified myself. "Look, lady, I bought the car fair and square from the homeowner. She had the keys and everything, said her son and daughter-in-law were selling it to buy something practical. She's my mother-in-law, not the owner," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "She had no authorization to sell the vehicle. It's registered in my name, and I have all the ownership documentation." A pause. "Well, I already started breaking it down for parts. The engine alone is worth more than what I paid." My stomach lurched. "Breaking it down, it's a complete authentic Cobra. It's worth $300,000 intact." His laugh mirrored Patricia's earlier disbelief. "No offense, but if it was worth that much, you wouldn't have been keeping it in a residential garage, and some old lady wouldn't have sold it for $15,000. "I can prove its value," I insisted. "I have copies of the authentication papers, restoration photos, even the original bill of sale from 1967. Look, I paid cash, got a receipt, and the car's already partially disassembled. Sorry about the misunderstanding, but that's business." He hung up. I gripped the sink, nausea rising. He'd already started destroying my meticulously restored masterpiece. Every minute that passed meant more damage, more parts separated, more value lost. The front door opened and closed. Jack's voice called out, "Mom, Amanda, I'm home early. Great news about the job interview." I emerged from the bathroom to find Jack's expression shifting from elation to confusion as he looked between his mother's proud smile and my tear-stained face. "What's happened?" he asked. Patricia spoke before I could. "I solved your car space problem and put some cash in your pockets. $15,000 for that old thing taking up the garage. Now you can buy something sensible." Jack's eyes widened. "You sold Amanda's Cobra without asking us?" "It was a surprise," Patricia said defensively. "I thought you'd both be pleased. It was just sitting there." "Jack," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your mother sold a $300,000 car for $15,000 without permission, without consulting either of us." $300,000? Jack trailed off, looking bewildered. "That can't be right. You never said it was worth that much." "I've been telling you both for months. The collector at the car show offered $280,000. I showed you the offer letter." Jack paled. "I thought that was just some enthusiasts being crazy. I didn't think it was a legitimate valuation." Patricia snorted. "It wasn't. No rust bucket is worth that kind of money. Amanda's been exaggerating to justify all the time and money she's wasted." I pulled out my phone, hands shaking with rage and grief. "Here," I said, showing Jack photos from the car show, the judge's evaluation, and the formal offer letter with the collector's credentials clearly visible. "Here's your proof." Jack sank into a chair, the color draining from his face. "Mom, what have you done?" Patricia's certainty faltered for the first time. "I was helping you both financially." "How was I supposed to know?" "By asking," I said flatly. "By respecting that it wasn't yours to sell. By listening when I repeatedly told you both its value." Jack reached for my hand. "We can work this out. Maybe we can buy it back." "The buyer's already dismantling it for parts," I said, pulling away from his touch. "And even if we could get it back, your mother gave away all the authentication papers that proved its value and provenance." "We can save up for another project car," Jack offered weakly. The suggestion was so disconnected from reality that I actually laughed, a harsh sound that made both Jack and Patricia flinch. "Another project car?" I repeated incredulously. This wasn't just a project car. This was a rare, authenticated 1967 Shelby Cobra that I spent 18 months restoring to concours condition. This was my father's dream that I finally fulfilled after he died. This was $300,000 of value that your mother just gave away for the price of a used Honda. "Now you're being dramatic," Patricia interjected. "If you'd been honest about its supposed value instead of keeping secrets, Keeping secrets? My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. I won Best in Show at a national car meet. I had it professionally appraised. I showed you both the offer letter from a legitimate collector. I literally could not have been more transparent. You should have put it in a museum if it was so precious, Patricia countered, folding her arms, not taking up space in my garage. I was paying you extra rent specifically for that garage space. I shouted, finally losing the battle with my composure. Jack stepped between us. This isn't helping. Mom, you should have asked us before selling anything, regardless of what you thought it was worth. Patricia's expression hardened into the martyred look I'd grown to recognize when she felt criticized. I was only trying to help. I don't deserve to be yelled at in my own home. The word home crystallized everything for me. This wasn't my home. It never had been. And Jack's tepid defense was 3 years too late. I need some air, I said, grabbing my purse and keys. Don't wait up. Jack followed me to the door. Where are you going? We need to figure this out together. Together, I repeated, turning to face him. There is no together here, Jack. There never has been. It's always been you and your mother on one side and me on the other. I'm going to a hotel to figure out my next steps. You're overreacting, he said, panic edging into his voice. It's just a car. Those 4 words severed something essential between us. It wasn't just a car. And this isn't just about the car. This is about 3 years of you choosing your mother's comfort over my basic right to respect. This is about boundaries that you've allowed her to cross repeatedly without consequence. I walked to my work vehicle, ignoring his calls behind me. Once inside, I called my friend Sophia, briefly explaining the situation through fresh tears. Come straight here, she said without hesitation. You can stay as long as you need. And we're calling my cousin Travis, who's an attorney, first thing tomorrow. That night in Sophia's guest room, I researched my legal options extensively. The situation was complicated. While the sale was clearly unauthorized, the buyer had a receipt, had paid cash, and had already begun dismantling the vehicle. The authentication papers were gone. The car's condition was being destroyed by the minute. The legal path would be long, expensive, and uncertain. And even if I recovered damages, it wouldn't bring back my father's dream made real. It wouldn't restore 18 months of painstaking work. It wouldn't return the one thing that had kept me connected to Dad. As dawn broke, I realized the car wasn't the only thing that had been dismantled. My marriage, built on the shaky foundation of Jack's conflict avoidance and my willingness to compromise, lay in pieces, just as scattered and damaged as my beloved Cobra. Sophia's cousin, Travis, specialized in property law and agreed to meet me for coffee that morning before his official office hours. His expression grew increasingly grave as I detailed the situation. Legally, this is an unauthorized sale of property, he confirmed, making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. You have grounds for action against both your mother-in-law and potentially the buyer, although his liability depends on whether he reasonably believed she had authority to sell. What do I need to prove my case? I asked, clutching my coffee cup like a lifeline. Documentation of ownership. Proof of the car's value. Evidence that your mother-in-law knew she wasn't authorized to sell it, and evidence that the buyer should have questioned her authority. I nodded, my mind already cataloging resources. I have digital backups of all the authentication papers. I documented every step of the restoration process with photos and videos. I have the appraisal from last month's car show and the written offer from the collector. Travis looked impressed. That's more than most clients have. What about evidence she wasn't authorized? The security camera I installed in the garage, I said, pulling out my phone. It uploads to cloud storage. I can access footage of any conversations we had about the car. While Travis reviewed my documents, I reached out to the classic car community through forums I'd frequented during the restoration. Within hours, I had offers of expert testimony on the Cobra's value, legal advice specific to collector vehicles, and even assistance in potentially recovering parts before they were sold separately. Marcus Jefferson, the head judge from the car show, emailed a formal statement about the Cobra's condition and estimated market value. A documented, Authentic 1967 Shelby Cobra in Concours condition is among the most valuable American collector cars, he wrote. The unauthorized sale of such a vehicle for a fraction of its worth constitutes not just a financial loss, but a loss to automotive heritage. Armed with growing documentation, I returned to Patricia's house the following afternoon, timing my arrival for when I knew she would be at her weekly bridge club. Jack was working from home and seemed simultaneously relieved and apprehensive to see me. "Amanda, I'm so glad you came back. We need to talk." "Yes, we do," I agreed, settling at the kitchen table. "But first, I need to know something. Did you have any knowledge of your mother's plan to sell my car?" "Of course not," he exclaimed, looking genuinely shocked. "I would never have allowed that." "Wouldn't you, though?" I asked quietly. "You've allowed her to cross every other boundary. You've defended her every other time she's disrespected me or my possessions." He sat heavily, shoulders slumping. "I know I've been caught in the middle. It's just, she's my mother, and she's been alone since Dad died. She means well." "Meaning well doesn't excuse harmful actions," I said. "And after 3 years of marriage, I expected to be your priority, not an inconvenience to be managed between your mother's demands." Jack rubbed his face tiredly. "She's been telling me things, that you were planning to leave once I found a job. That you've been secretive about money. That you resent having to live here." I stared at him. "And you believed her without asking me directly?" "I didn't want to create conflict," he admitted. "So, you allowed conflict to fester instead." I shook my head, disappointed but not surprised. "Jack, have you ever wondered why your mother felt entitled to sell my car? It's because you've shown her repeatedly that there are no consequences when she oversteps." While Jack processed this, I went to Patricia's study, looking for any evidence that might strengthen my case. In the bottom drawer of her desk, partially hidden under household files, I found her journal. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. Under normal circumstances, I would never violate someone's privacy this way, but these were not normal circumstances. The entries from the past month confirmed my suspicions. April 3rd, that eyesore in my garage needs to go. Jay won't stand up to A about it, so I'll need to handle it myself. Found A's buyer's card she left on the counter. Will call tomorrow. April 10th. Buyer not interested unless title is present with documentation. Will need another approach. That car is taking up space I need for summer garden supplies. April 15th. Met Roger at the grocery store. He restores old cars. Mentioned the Cobra casually. He seemed very interested. Invited him to stop by sometime to see it. The most damning entry was from just 2 days before the sale. April 28th. Roger coming tomorrow while A is at work. Told him $15,000 cash as is. Jay has job interview. Won't be home either. Once it's done, they'll have to accept it. Better to ask forgiveness than permission with these things. I photographed the pages, hands trembling with fresh anger. This hadn't been a misunderstanding or a well-intentioned mistake. This had been calculated, deliberate theft. When I showed Jack the journal entries, the last of his defense crumbled. "I had no idea she would do something like this," he whispered. "I knew she could be controlling, but this is criminal." "Yes," I agreed simply. "It is." With Jack finally seeing the reality of his mother's behavior, we located Roger's address through the contact information Patricia had kept. My attorney advised against confronting him, but when I learned from a mutual connection in the car community that Roger planned to sell the Cobra's engine that weekend to a buyer in Chicago, I knew time was running out. Jack insisted on accompanying me to Roger's workshop, bringing Travis for legal support. We arrived to find the Cobra in pieces, its beautiful body separated from the chassis, the interior components stacked carelessly in a corner. Roger was initially hostile, insisting he'd made a legal purchase, but his demeanor changed when Travis presented the documentation of the car's ownership and value along with evidence of Patricia's lack of authority to sell. "I didn't know," Roger said, running a hand through his thinning hair. The older lady seemed legitimate. "Had the keys, knew details about the car." "Did she show you the title?" Travis asked. "Well, no, but she had what looked like documentation in a binder, said her son and daughter-in-law were selling to buy something practical." Travis nodded. That's the problem, Mr. Daniels. She presented herself as having authority she didn't possess, and you failed to verify proper ownership through standard channels like checking the vehicle title. The reality of his legal exposure dawned visibly on Roger's face. So, what happens now? After 2 hours of tense negotiation, we reached an agreement. Roger would return all components of the Cobra still in his possession, including the authentication binder and my father's watch from the hidden compartment. In exchange, I would compensate him for the $15,000 he had paid Patricia, plus $2,000 for his trouble. He would also provide a detailed inventory of any parts already sold or modified beyond repair, for which we would seek damages from Patricia. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than I had dared hope. The Cobra could potentially be restored again, though it would never be quite the same. More importantly, I had recovered my father's watch and the documentation that proved the car's provenance and value. As we prepared to confront Patricia with the evidence of her deliberate actions, I consulted with a therapist Sophia recommended about setting healthy boundaries. You're not just dealing with the car, Dr. Evelyn Chin pointed out. You're dealing with a pattern of disrespect that's been enabled for years. Any resolution needs to address the underlying relationship dynamics, not just the immediate issue. With her guidance, I prepared for what would likely be the most difficult conversation of my life. I organized all evidence chronologically, created a clear outline of consequences, and practiced maintaining calm assertiveness in the face of denial or emotional manipulation. Remember, Dr. Chin advised, people who have never faced consequences for their behavior often respond with increased manipulation when boundaries are finally enforced. Stay focused on the facts and your non-negotiable requirements. By the time Patricia returned from her bridge club to find Jack, Travis, and me waiting at her kitchen table, with the disassembled pieces of the Cobra being returned to her garage, I was prepared for battle. What I hadn't prepared for was how empowered I would feel finally standing my ground. Patricia's first reaction upon entering the kitchen was confusion, quickly replaced by defensive hostility when she spotted Travis in his professional attire. "What's this about?" she demanded, setting down her purse. "Who is this man?" "Please sit down, Mom," Jack said, his voice firmer than I'd ever heard him use with her. "This is Travis Coleman, Amanda's attorney. We need to have a serious discussion about the car you sold without permission." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "I don't need an attorney to discuss doing you both a favor." "It wasn't a favor, Patricia," I said calmly. "It was unauthorized sale of property, and we have evidence it was premeditated." Travis opened his briefcase, laying out documents methodically. "Mrs. Blake, I represent Amanda in this matter. We have substantial documentation establishing both the ownership and value of the vehicle you sold, as well as evidence you knew you weren't authorized to sell it." Patricia scoffed, but took the seat across from us. "This is absurd." It was an old car taking up space in my garage. It was a 1967 Shelby Cobra worth approximately $300,000, I corrected, sliding the professional appraisal across the table. "This is the official valuation from Marcus Jefferson, head judge at the Midwest Classic Car Association. And this," Jack added, placing her journal entries beside the appraisal, "is proof you planned this deliberately, knowing we would be out of the house, knowing you didn't have permission." Patricia's face paled slightly as she recognized her own handwriting. "You went through my private things? How dare you? How dare I?" I repeated incredulously. "You sold my $300,000 car for $15,000 without permission, and you're concerned about privacy?" Travis intervened smoothly. "Mrs. Blake, the evidence clearly establishes this was not a misunderstanding. You documented your intent to sell property you knew wasn't yours. That constitutes theft under Michigan law. I was just trying to help you both financially." Patricia insisted, turning to Jack with wounded eyes. "You know I would never do anything to hurt you." "Stop it, Mom," Jack said wearily. "I've read your journal. You weren't thinking about us. You wanted the car gone because it bothered you, not because you were trying to help." I laid out photos of the now dismantled Cobra. "This is what's left of 18 months of restoration work. This is what's left of my tribute to my father. This is what your help has done." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Patricia's face. Well, how was I supposed to know it was valuable? You should have told me. I did tell you repeatedly. You chose not to listen, I said. And even if it had been worthless, it still wasn't yours to sell. It belonged to me. What do you want from me? Patricia asked, her defensive posture beginning to crumble as the reality of her situation became clear. Travis outlined our terms professionally. Financial restitution for the full appraised value of the vehicle in its pre-sale condition minus the current value of recoverable parts. Based on our expert's assessment, that amounts to approximately $240,000. Patricia gasped. That's impossible. I don't have that kind of money. You have significant equity in this house, Travis noted, and substantial investments, according to the financial statements in your recent mortgage refinancing application. Jack looked at his mother steadily. This was wrong, Mom. You need to make this right. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. You would side with her against your own mother after everything I've done for you? This isn't about sides, Jack replied. This is about accountability. You made a conscious decision to sell something valuable that didn't belong to you. There are consequences for that decision. I watched Patricia cycle through her usual tactics: denial, victimhood, anger, minimization. When none gained traction, genuine shock seemed to register. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was facing actual consequences for her actions. I need time to think, she stammered, to consult my own attorney. Of course, Travis agreed. We can give you 48 hours to review these terms with legal counsel. After that, if we don't have an agreement, we'll proceed with formal charges. As Travis gathered his documents, I added one final condition. Regardless of the financial resolution, Jack and I will be moving out immediately. Any future relationship will depend on demonstrated respect for boundaries. Patricia turned to Jack, desperate. You don't have to leave. This is between Amanda and me. No, Mom, Jack said firmly. This is about patterns of behavior that I've enabled for too long. Amanda's right. We need our own space and clear boundaries. We left Patricia sitting at her kitchen table, the carefully constructed reality where her actions had no consequences finally crumbling around her. Over the next 2 days, we secured a small apartment and moved our essential belongings. Jack's new job would start the following week, providing financial stability while we rebuilt. Roger had provided a detailed inventory of the Cobra's components. Some parts had already been sold, but the engine, transmission, and most of the body remained recoverable. The frame had been damaged during disassembly, significantly reducing the car's potential restoration value. Patricia's attorney contacted Travis with a settlement offer, $175,000 in cash from her investments, plus the return of all recovered car components. After consultation with classic car experts about realistic restoration costs and diminished value, I accepted. The resolution with Roger was similarly pragmatic. He returned everything still in his possession, including, miraculously, my father's watch from the hidden compartment he hadn't yet discovered. The authentication papers were mostly intact, though some had been damaged when he emptied the trunk. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I stood in our new apartment's small garage, looking at the crated components of what had once been my perfect Cobra. The sight brought a complex mixture of grief and determination. The car would never be exactly what it was before, but neither would I. We had both been dismantled and would need to be rebuilt with the understanding that some scars would always remain visible. That evening, as Jack and I sat on our second-hand couch eating takeout, he asked the question that had been hovering between us. Can you ever forgive her? I considered carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't the same as restoration of trust. I can eventually forgive the action, while still recognizing the relationship is fundamentally damaged. He nodded slowly. And us? Are we fundamentally damaged too? I don't know yet, I answered honestly. That depends on whether this experience has truly changed how you approach boundaries and conflict. For the first time in our relationship, we were having the difficult conversation without evasion or appeasement. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. And real was something I could work with. 6 months passed in a blur of adjustment and rebuilding. Jack and I settled into our apartment, establishing routines untainted by Patricia's influence. His new marketing position proved both stable and fulfilling. While I divided my time between restoration work for clients and the slow process of assessing what could be salvaged from the Cobra, Patricia remained in our lives, but on vastly different terms. Our contact was limited to occasional, supervised visits, always in neutral locations like restaurants or parks. Jack had made it clear that any violation of our boundaries would result in immediate departure, a rule he enforced without hesitation the first time she began criticizing my career choices over lunch. The settlement money provided financial security and options. After extensive consultation with restoration experts, I made a difficult decision. Rather than attempting to restore the Cobra to its former glory, I would use the components and settlement to establish my own restoration business, creating a legacy that honored my father in a different way. Lake Vintage Restorations opened in a modest industrial space with state-of-the-art equipment, and the Cobra's engine displayed prominently as both a conversation piece and a reminder of what had been lost and gained. Jack had begun therapy to address his conflict avoidance and codependency issues, examining the patterns established in childhood that had led to our marriage difficulties. I never realized how much I've structured my entire life around avoiding confrontation, he admitted one evening, even when it meant sacrificing things and people I cared about. My own growth focused on assertiveness and setting clear boundaries earlier, rather than accommodating until resentment boiled over. I learned to identify warning signs of disrespect before situations escalated to crisis level. The car community rallied around me in unexpected ways. Several collectors who had admired the Cobra at shows offered restoration projects that helped establish my business reputation quickly. Marcus Jefferson, the judge who had awarded my Cobra Best in Show, became a mentor and eventually a business partner, bringing decades of expertise and connections. "What happened to your Cobra was a tragedy," he told me during a restoration consultation, "but your knowledge and passion are intact. Those can't be sold off by anyone." As my confidence and business grew, I reconnected with authentic parts of myself that had been suppressed during those months under Patricia's roof. I resumed attending car shows, this time as a respected restorer rather than just an enthusiast. I formed genuine friendships with people who valued my expertise without questioning whether it was appropriate for my gender. The most unexpected healing came during a visit from Mr. Caldwell, the elderly neighbor who had originally provided the Cobra. "Found something else while clearing out that barn," he said, holding out a dusty folder. "Thought you might want these." Inside were the original factory build sheets for the Cobra, documentation even more valuable than what had been lost in the unauthorized sale. The papers verified the car's provenance beyond question and provided precise specifications that would have made restoration easier. "Too late for that car," I said, carefully examining the yellowed papers. "But these will help authenticate other Cobras. They're incredibly valuable to the restoration community." Mr. Caldwell nodded. "Figure they should go to someone who appreciates them. My brother would have wanted that." Those build sheets became the cornerstone of a reference library I established for fellow restorers, transforming a personal loss into a community resource. Patricia's journey toward understanding proved slower and more tentative. The financial consequences had forced genuine reflection, but old habits persisted. In our limited interactions, I observed her struggling between defensive justification and grudging recognition of wrongdoing. During a carefully managed holiday dinner at a restaurant, she made her first genuine attempt at accountability. "I still don't understand why anyone would spend that much on an old car," she began awkwardly, "but I had no right to make that decision for you. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology wasn't perfect, but it was authentic, free from the qualifications and deflections that had characterized her previous attempts. I acknowledged it with a simple, "Thank you for recognizing that." Not forgiveness yet, but a step towards something less broken. Jack watched this exchange with visible relief, no longer frantically trying to smooth tensions or minimize conflict. He had learned that healthy relationships could withstand disagreement, that respect didn't require constant appeasement. As for the Cobra, its story continued differently than I had imagined. Using the settlement money and recovered components, I built a custom display for car museums and educational events, showcasing both the beauty of the original vehicle and the cautionary tale of its fate. The exhibit, titled Value Beyond Price, traveled to automotive heritage events nationwide, teaching enthusiasts about documentation, ownership protection, and preservation. On the anniversary of my father's passing, I visited his grave with a small replica of the Cobra and fresh news about the restoration business. "It didn't turn out how we planned, Dad," I said quietly, placing the model beside fresh flowers. "But I think you'd approve of what grew from it." The business was thriving, specializing in the very vehicles my father had loved. Each restoration incorporated his techniques and standards, his influence living on through my hands. The lessons he'd taught me about fixing what was broken had extended beyond engines and transmissions into relationships and self-worth. Some vehicles, like some relationships, could be fully restored. Others required accepting that certain damage was permanent, salvaging what remained valuable, and building something new that honored the original while acknowledging its transformed state. The most valuable restoration I discovered wasn't the Cobra at all. It was my own sense of self, strengthened by standing my ground, enforcing boundaries, and refusing to accept disrespect as the price of peace. In the quiet moments of reflection, when I ran my fingers over the salvaged components of what had been my masterpiece, I no longer felt only loss. I felt the hard-won wisdom that comes from protecting what matters, even when that protection comes too late to prevent damage. Some things, once broken, reveal strengths that remained hidden while they were whole.